At the beginning of World War II, the United States had 5 aircraft carriers. Well, by the end of World War II, they built almost 151 aircraft carriers. Now, the majority of those would be escort carriers, which would mean they were smaller, more lightly armed, and they would help protect escort ships and things like that. Well, today we're going to tour one of those aircraft carriers called the USS Yorktown. So, we are going to start up here on the main flight deck. This is so cool. I'm literally on the flight deck of the USS Yorktown. Awesome. So we're on the flight deck, and this thing goes at least 6 to 8 stories above us. Wow. And here's that anti-aircraft position. This is a 40mm cannon, and they'd fire like an airburst shell that would hopefully take down enemy aircraft. So before we tour the main flight deck here, the USS Yorktown was one of 24 Essex-class carriers. So the Yorktown was initially named the Bonhomme Richard, and she would be named the USS Yorktown after the sinking of another aircraft carrier that was called the USS Yorktown, and that aircraft carrier sunk at the Battle of Midway. So this current version was built in, I believe, 1943, and it was commissioned the Yorktown, and it served all the way up until Vietnam. So you're going to see aircraft from numerous eras here, from World War II all the way up until Vietnam. And I believe the USS Yorktown was decommissioned in 1970, I believe. So, coming up to our first aircraft, this is an F-4 Phantom, and this was a Vietnam airplane, and extremely fast. And there were several different versions, this one being the Navy version here. And the F-4 Phantom here would eventually be replaced by a plane called the F-14 Tomcat. And looks like we're approaching an F-18 Hornet. Really cool. It's the workhorse of the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. The carrier-based all-weather strike fighter has served in a multitude of roles since entering service in 1983. So this plane didn't serve on the Yorktown. Again, the Yorktown was decommissioned in 1970, but they're just giving you an example of one of the modern-day carrier-based fighter jets. So this plane here is a Sky Warrior, and it saw service in the 1950s, and it was the largest carrier-based craft, and it was used for strategic bombing. But something that I found interesting is this little point here, or boom. Well, that was so it can be refueled in the air. And here's one of the lighter attack craft here. This is an A7 Corsair II. This is a pretty gnarly air intake here, just below the nose. And just to kind of give you a little view, these pieces here, they would hold the armaments, whether it be missiles, bombs, or things of that nature. There is no way I'm going to be able to show you everything aboard the aircraft carrier. We've been here for about an hour so far, and we've only seen the top flight deck. This thing is so massive, you don't even feel like you're on a boat. Like, you feel like you're just walking on an airstrip. Really cool. If you're ever in Charleston, the USS Yorktown, put it on your list and make sure you have a whole day. So this is a Skyhawk, and it saw some service in the 1950s, and it was really compact, so you didn't even need folding wings. But if you're curious as to how they would land here on the flight deck, well, there'd be a system of cables, and they would have this boom here, and this boom would catch the cable and stop the plane, hopefully. And I believe there was a series of cables, so if you missed the first couple, you would at least hit one. But that's pretty interesting. I've never really seen that up close. So there's so much to say in the aircraft. I'm explaining the wire system to you, and I literally walked right over one. But they'd be connected here on each side of the flight deck, and you can see this is a really thick steel cable, and it would run across the flight deck, and when the plane would land, it would hook the cable and stop the plane. And again, you can see there's several of these other connections here. So if they didn't land perfectly and hit the first one, they had 3 or 4 more chances to hit one of these cables. Pretty good visual to see. Jeez. So a lot of the planes that have the folding wings are designed that way to save room on carriers, but you can see all the mechanisms inside just to make it fold. Wow. And just to give you a little example, again, I'm 5'11", and it's not as cramped as you'd think, but it's definitely not big. This is your ready room, and as you can see by some of the pictures here, this is where the fighter pilots would be briefed on the mission, and some of the planning would take place here as well. This is really cool. And your pilots and where you were and your call signs, your mission, things like that. Wow, this is cool to see. Here's one of the radio rooms here. High tech for the time. This is cool. Wow. There's your early radar system here. Sailor plotting some sort of position, either the enemy or hopefully ours. Wow. Little glimpse into what life was like here. Making our way up to the bridge now. All right. So this room here is the Admiral sea cabin. Pretty cool. I believe he has bunk and shower, washroom, all that good stuff in here. And for obvious reasons, he's right here next to the flight deck. Now we're entering the navigator's chart room, which is directly above the Admiral's room. Man, all this stuff is so interesting. Couldn't imagine without GPS and modern day technology, them coordinating not just one ship but entire fleets. Wow. Alright, the wife's at the helm here. Where are we going? Good talk. Thought this was neat. This is some of the portholes have this armor plating that goes over them and has a little slit here so you can still see out. Thought that was pretty cool to see up close. Alright, now we're in the captain's bridge. Great view of the flight deck. Wow. Again, just looking at some of these instruments that they would have used. It seems so archaic, but for the time, it was pretty advanced technology. So we're just below the main flight deck, and they have tons of World War II aircraft. And if we have trouble identifying some of them, like I do, this one before us is a B-25 Mitchell. And it has this interactive board where you can see different parts of the plane here. Wow. Now something that's cool is, I believe it was in 1942, the they were actually able to launch a group of these off of an aircraft carrier, and it was called the Doolittle Raid, which is incredible because these things were definitely not designed to fly off an aircraft carrier. And if you're curious as to how they load the bombs in the belly of the plane, well, they'd use these carts here. Jeez. I'm kind of near the tail of the U-25 here. And this is inside. You can see one of the ball turrets there. Looks like another turret would be here. That's pretty neat. So, we touched on the Doolittle Raid. On April 18th, 1942, the ruptured duck took off from the USS Hornet, piloted by Lieutenant Ted W. Lawson as aircraft number 7 of the 16 bombers. The ruptured duck dropped 3 demolition bombs and 1 incendiary bomb on industrial sections of Tokyo, Japan. So this is always something that's pretty interesting to me. This is your standard biplane that was very prominent in World War I in the 1920s. And less than 20 years later, we were sporting these. So, this is the Hellcat. And this was a World War II fighter that actually had one of the highest kill ratios throughout the war. It was a very formidable plane, and in fact, in Florida, one of the main bases to train if you were flying this aircraft would be in Green Cove Springs. Really cool to see this up close. You can kind of see the white underbelly here, and I believe that was a form of camouflage to help it try and at least blend into the sky just a little bit. And here's one of my favorite planes of World War II. This is the F-4U Corsair. I just love the style of it. The wings would fold up. Very cool. Some of the info on the Corsair here. 6 forward-facing 50 caliber machine guns and an 11-to-1 kill ratio. You can kind of see where the machine guns would be. And I believe they can put bombs, and later in the war they even put rockets on the wings. So a very versatile aircraft. And this guy here, it's hard to tell. It kind of looks like a Corsair, but it's actually an AD-4N Sky Raider. And this saw service in the Vietnam War. You can see some of the armaments here. It could have a bomb, rockets, torpedoes, and instead of the 50 caliber machine guns, they had these, the 20mm cannons. It's really neat. And you can see this tank down here. That's usually a tank for fuel. So this guy here is the F4F Wildcat, not to be confused with the Hellcat. The Hellcat would come after this fighter here. And again, let's give you a little example here. 2 250-pound bombs or 6 5-inch rockets, 6 forward-facing 50 caliber machine guns. And this kill ratio was 7-to-1. And something to note in the beginning of World War II, the Japanese Zero would far outclass the United States fighters. So there was a lot of catching up to do. And here is the Avenger, which was a torpedo bomber. You can kind of see it here. It's really cool. I love how there's so many different variations of fighters and they all had a certain purpose. 2 fixed forward firing 50 caliber machine guns and 1 dorsal 50 caliber machine gun. That's pretty interesting. So I guess they would have another pilot in the back here, or a co-pilot, and he'd be a rear-facing gunner, which is pretty interesting for a fighter aircraft. And just an example of the torpedo here on the Avenger. Gosh, this thing's at least 10 to 12 feet long. And you can kind of see how it sits right in the belly here. Pretty impressive. And some of the missions here you can see. Saipan, Wake Island. So this is pretty interesting and something I didn't know, but apparently the USS Yorktown helped retrieve the crew of Apollo 8, and this hook here was part of the original tackle used to lift Apollo 8 aboard the Yorktown on December 27, 1968. That's pretty interesting. Now, of course, to protect the carrier, you obviously had the fleet around the carrier, but the carrier also had its own weaponry. And these are 40mm cannons, and this is the size shell that this would fire. And again, these would be pointed into the air. So the ammunition for a lot of those guns that we saw, the anti-aircraft guns, was kept below deck for protection, obviously. This is one of the ammo hoists. So they have some World War II artifacts here, and this one is fascinating but extremely sad. But this is a fragment from a kamikaze Japanese aircraft. November 25th, 1944, USS Essex is hit by a kamikaze on her port edge flight deck among planes gassed and ready for takeoff, killing 15. Wow. Now here's a few other pieces of kamikaze aircraft, and this one was fastened into a bracelet. And this is pretty interesting. These are Japanese cigarettes. Now this is fascinating. This is a Japanese flight suit, but it had a plug, and you can plug it into the aircraft to keep warm. Wow. So this is First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt christening the USS Yorktown. And here are the ribbons and bottle holder. And here is the original bottle holder with the cork and top of the bottle. And the ribbons. So that was the USS Yorktown. My first time ever on an aircraft carrier, and it was a really good visual. You got a little insight into what carrier life was like, and also got to see a lot of the different kinds of planes that it carried throughout the conflicts, starting in World War II and working all the way to Vietnam. So yeah, the USS Yorktown. If you're ever in Charleston, be sure to pay this place a visit. And like I said, it was way too big to include everything in this episode. There's definitely a lot of things for you to still see here. So you guys take care, and we'll see you on the next one.